Okay, I have all my seams pressed nice and flat, pressed open. That reduces the amount of bulk that we have in our joins, or where the seams come together. So this will go here, and then this one will go here. So let's do this one first. And I've saved most of the paper on the center block, so we're going to use that as a guideline for our stitching. But again, we have 3 points to match up, so we want to make sure that we get those exactly lined up. And we'll put the pin through both the points. And then we'll put the clip on there. Okay, those two are matched up. So, we'll make sure, we'll make that nice and even. That's why you want to match these up before you start to sew. That way you can kind of align everything else really nice. We also want to check our stitches here where those two meet. Let me use where'd my pin go? Let me use the pin on that one since I'm out of clips. That's all fabric, there's no paper there, so that works, okay? Pin through the points. Making sure the pin is perpendicular. Wonder clip there. And then we're going to check our seams here, make sure that those are lined up, and we'll put a pin in there. Because, well, it's mostly fabric. I did leave a little bit of paper in there just so you can see what happens if you don't remove your paper. So we're ready to sew this seam. And since I've left most of that paper there, I'll just follow along on that line. Again, a couple back stitches just to hold that seam. It's an outer seam, so you don't want it to start popping away, popping open. And when I'm going past these points, I'm going just a thread or two past the point, just so there's room for the fabric to fold and I don't get that point inside my fold. And then I'm just holding with my finger those fabrics together just so they don't shift that last inch or so before it goes through the needle. Okay, now here we just want to make sure that we're doing a 1/4 inch seam. You want to aim for your points here since we don't have paper on this side. Just keep going straight. Back stitches. And let's see how we did on this. So we're trying to match up our points, match up our seams. That looks pretty good. And when we remove all the papers and press it with the water, these will open up a little bit more. So that looks really good. So the nice thing about paper piecing is that it's a lot easier to line everything up because the paper holds the shape of the units and you don't get any shifting or stretching. when you're sewing them together. Okay, so the next one goes this way. And I've left most of these papers on. I just tore out my corner. There's a couple corners here. I probably should tear those out too. Just tear a little corner out just so that it doesn't get stuck in the seam allowance. So I have paper all on this side, so maybe I'll stitch on this side instead of this side. So I'll start with the middle, the center, line up my points. There we go. Just get that pin going through the two, go straight down, line everything up on both sides. A wonder clip in there. So it really does help just to take the extra time to do the pinning and clipping to get your points and your seams to line up. Okay, next we want to line up these two seams. Now you'll notice that's off a little bit, so I'm going to have to try to work some of that extra fabric into my seam. And it may just not line up very well when I sew it. So no big deal. You know, these don't have to be absolutely perfect, but by putting this fabric on the bottom, and I'm going to remove the paper too, so that's kind of out of my way. The feed dogs will kind of absorb some of that extra fabric there. Paper away a little bit so it's not in the seam allowance anymore. So there's a little bit of give with the fabric, but the papers will kind of hold everything in place if the papers are there. So pulling those papers away from the seams will help me get a little bit more flexibility with that fabric. Those points even matched up. Clip it, and then we're going to look at the seam allowance. This one looks a lot better. That looks pretty good. Put a pin in there just to hold it. Alright, let's see if we can... Let me check that center. Maybe my points are off a little bit, and that's why I'm getting a little bit of bulk there. So if I go through there... Yeah, so it looks like my point is off just a little bit, and that's what's causing the shift. But I'd rather have that be off just a little bit instead of trying to work in some extra fabric on these seams. It's just hard to work that extra fabric in. So sometimes they don't match up perfectly, and that's quite alright. Just get it as close as possible. So I might have been off on just a little bit on one of my seams. Always remove your pins. You don't want to sew over those. Even if your needle might hit it, but it's also not good for your feed dogs. It'll scrape up your feed dogs too. Okay, I'm going to hold this down nice and tight. Try to stay on the line. Hold this one so it doesn't shift. Back stitch, couple.